Hi,
Hi.
John Allen. Say a little bit about yourself. Who are you?
Oh, wait a minute. I'm just now coming on.
I'm sure he doesn't understand what the background thing is, but can you maybe do this? You can.
All right, John, just tell us who you are.
Well, my name is John Allen.
What do you think your most important contribution to humanity is?
Well, thanks for the implication that that something has been good for humanity. But now explication is probably going to be more difficult than implication.
Yes. If
What would you say to answer that question?
are you proud of things that you have done, and why would that be?
What would you say are your greatest life accomplishments that you feel the most proud about?
Well, as a Darwinian, I would say my survival.
And at age 91, I think that's something to be very proud of. Let's go into maybe the reason behind the biosphere.
Well, if you're interested in reality, one of the most interesting things for a human to decide is where are we? They can give all kinds of answers. They can say you're in the universe, multiverse, the solar system. You can get it down for the government. You could say you're in such and such a county, in such and such a state, in such and such a national state, in such and such a world order, and so forth and so forth. However, I find it most useful myself to figure that I'm on when I am on a planet circulating around well, zooming with, actually, that's not around, everybody's in motion. Located somewhere in a universe, which is actually probably a polyverse. And that probably be the next big discovery of humanity is like, you know, many people thought everything moved around the Earth, and then they thought everything moved around the sun. And now everybody thinks it's moving around the universe, which has loaded with assumptions like one turn versus turn. So they think they're getting on one turn. So it's no wonder then that most people become subconsciously, at least, hopeless. In fact, if you study the second law of thermodynamics, then you would have a scientific backup on why it's so hopeless. And of course, this contradicts with something called evolution. And of course, some people even question evolution. Is that still continuing, or are we now in an involutionary stage? And so a lot of people in philosophy always are with who am I? But I think it's more fundamental to say, where am I? And that's mostly how I've operated scientifically, is where am I? And there's all sorts of answers to that. The one I like is that we're in X, which is in Y, which is in Z, which is in for example, inside me then is different philosophies, different worldviews, different verbs, blah, 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 all of that stuff. But each of those has an external effect too. So I think one of the main things that is very hard for people to, for humans, for me, to really understand is that these are all questions. Where am I? What am I? That's a good one. What am I? Most philosophers wind up and say nothing. not anything.
If you were to speak to the younger generation who says, why didn't we do more to protect the planet? What would you say to them?
I say you're seeing are the limits of the financial capitalism driven for maximizing individual profit.
And how do we find a way to protect the planet from that?
Well, that's really hard because actually the planet is mainly protecting us.
We've certainly learned that in the past few months, haven't
So
we?
the first thing is to appreciate that the planet is protecting us. Otherwise, why should I do anything for the planet? But the planet does protect us in many, many different ways. For example, from flying asteroids. And we don't even know from what else. We humans, still every year kill a lot of other humans arguing on who are we, where are we, what am we?
Why did you cross into my land? Huh?
So these are, I pronounce it questions, ways to shun the question. And
in some ways, even your own attempt at Biosphere and the research there may have suffered at the end, especially you were talking about not being able to get some of the research you had done, when the emphasis was more on things other than the common good. Am I right? If we even take away all the greed or whatever else, just that people get caught up in other things rather than the goal.
well, you see,
Reclaiming the commons, that's a theme actually. That is some people that are really trying to get back to a more just place for humans and nature, to reclaim that commons that's disappeared. It's gone to, you know, the individual pursuit of, you know, happiness, private property. We have lost the commons. So it's one way of adjusting our society has built, like you were saying, you know, what that you know, the monetization of the planet is basically driving towards, you know, the individual pursuit of and that we've lost sight of the commons and the common good, the community.
well, mainly to understand the situation, you have to understand that most of the most powerful forces on the planet are dedicated to stopping any scientific understanding at all. To start with, almost any religion, they have to have a solution. God, but which God? 12 gods, 13 gods, 3 gods, and so forth. And millions of people, literally millions of people have been killed, exiled. In a certain sense, you could say I'm in exile out here in Santa Fe County. Now, it's quite true, having read about all that, I kept my footholds in London, and I gave up the problem of keeping one in New York. But freer countries like Mexico City and London, people are more, intelligentsia are more open to considering all the possible vectors. And then you run up to something, well, we really don't know what's possible, but we could say something that's impossible. And so then you start looking at, well, what is definitely impossible? And that turns out to be a pretty indefinite one too.
You know, when we're talking about power and maybe greed and corruption, you were telling me a story about being a young field worker and learning how to organize.
Oh, yeah.
So when we think about the power of people coming together with a common cause, and we've seen that in environmentalism many times. Earth Day celebrated its 50-year anniversary this year. So what is it that we can do to bring the power of the people who do want to protect this planet that nourishes and sustains us?
There, you start using pronouns like we. Who is we? And for example, off my head, if you're a CIO, can you be an AFL in unions? If you are a bourgeois capitalist, then can you be a state capitalist? And so forth and so forth. So one of the big, maybe the biggest problem for people to understand, when people in the first place don't want to understand anything, they want to overstand. If they can't overstand, they put a priest up under this, or they put a scientist up in a space rotating around and looking down on Earth. Of course, they still have to look up to Mars and the sun. And the sun still has to look up to the galaxy. The galaxy still has to look up to the universe. And the universe very probably has to look up to a multiverse. And who knows what is out of all this versus bit anyway. Maybe you have to get all of the verses to get the real poetry. The English language is truly marvelous. Well, it's put together, see, of German,
Yep.
Latin, this godforsaken fog-ridden island called Britain. And somehow they got the key to at least understanding the planet with some help from Italians. But the main thing was that the people in London had destroyed it, and they weren't threatened to being burned at the stake like Galileo was. So Newton was able to progress onward, and Galileo, it all came to a stop in Italy. And it may well be that we who belong to the English-speaking tradition, I mean, we've come to a stop.
Do you think that there might be an opportunity that now that we've all been forced to pause our lives to envision something that is individually, each of us individually? I think that's part of what my mission on the planet has been, is to say how each one of us is co-creating our existence. So a lot of people would say, I'm pro-environmentalism as they commute 2 hours to work and never conceive that there might be another possibility, right? Mm-hmm. Now, each one of us has been forced to pause, and we've all experienced other possibilities than long commutes or traveling by air all the time everywhere. We can now sometimes just do a video conference instead. So do you think that there might be a moment here where we all, maybe, I'm interested.
Well, actually, we came to that point. We started off with an enterprise to develop potentiality. And actually, we developed a lot of potentiality. And so forth. But then that leads you, where does potentiality deal with all possibility? And what does all possibilities do with the fact that there's been a transformation all possibilities in different historical epochs, and probably in other solar systems or other galaxies anyway. So I think one of the biggest things with what's often called modern people is that brainwashing went out. People could see through brainwashing, so they substituted whoever these unknown they are. Maybe it's it. It's brain laundering, and now I've been brain laundered at some of the best laundries on the planet, the best I could find. Well, in the hope that some of them maybe not be just a laundry, it might actually might be a whole different set of costumes. Maybe even an evolution of a different kind of body. Yeah, sure. Okay, now, bend it. Well, see, there's a lot of things like that.
Let's see. Definitely you've been involved in the experiment or the experiencement
I call it
of the
experiencement.
potential of helping of yourself, basically for individuals to realizing their full human potential.
Well, at least more of it.
How?
Well, that's why we call it theater of all possibilities. The theater of all possibilities is the human organism.
All the world's a stage.
All the
men
world's
and
a
women merely
stage.
players.
And all the men and women really play they have their exits and their entrances, and each man in his time plays many parts. His acts being 7 ages.
You've been given 9 at least.
Mm-hmm.
I said you've been given 9 ages. You're past the 7 ages that you were allotted.
Well,
You have 9 ages.
and that's so short. Well, the mathematics keeps working up to 13, actually. That's a 7 and a 6. 6 is recurrence, and 7 is transformations. Now, if you have a recurrence that goes on long enough and you have transformations that hack at it long enough, then you get what has been called so far evolution, which also has been observed as nearly all evolutions become involutionary. Nearly all, not all. Some are still a question mark.
How were you trying to increase the potentiality of the people who worked with you? Because you have worked with many people, and you've actually achieved a lot with these people, and sometimes even giving them jobs that they didn't feel they were qualified for at the time. How did you do this?
Well, I tried to find, or actually, I don't think you can find, I try to vibe into or vibe with, vibrate in or vibrate with somebody or some enterprise or some location that's higher vibration than I've seen before. And then I try to get to where I can do what that higher vibration can do. Be like, again, bend my arm. Okay, now, if I use a certain method, go ahead.
Okay.
See what I mean?
So what was the higher vibration of that area in Arizona? Where the
Well, see,
biosphere?
this vibrations deal with energies.
Yes.
So there's 12 energies that can be identified. And generally, Western civilization stops at well, generally it stops at about 2, this or that. You have a choice, this or that. And some people have advanced to 3. Well, you can have this, that, or the other thing. And mathematically, you can get fairly easily up to 13, actually. Or say 7 is a number for transformation, and 6 is recurrence. 7 plus 6 is 13. So 13 is generally called an unlucky number, because if you're transforming something, then whatever you're transforming was unlucky enough to come to the end of the line.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why all revolutions are places of turmoil. Well, revolution. There's evolution, and then you got to do it again. That's a revolution. And generally, to get a revolution, you have to have an involution. You have to attract some higher energy or understanding.
Were you doing that with the people you worked with? Was that part of the process of creative? Was to channel in a higher wisdom of some sort?
Well, I don't know about channeling.
I would say that you applied the structures to managerial thought. You applied the approach to projects by using the law of 6, the law of 7. You know, is this a hyparchic time in history? Is this project going to create, you know, catharsis, social change? He worked with synergy. In the early years, the idea of synergia, working together, that whole concept was fundamental to the construct of developing, doing something with others. So it's working with others. Synergia effectively means working with others, and that the idea is the sum is greater, that the result is greater than the sum of all the parts. So this was Buckminster Fuller's ideas were a big catalyst for you and many other people around the world. And when you started Synergia Ranch, it was the beginning of really trying to find a form or building blocks for how to live together. For, you know, and in this particular case, in this line school, that involved basically having 3 lines of work going all at the same time: work on yourself, work with others, and work for the greater cosmos. And that meant the project also emulated that. So people had their own individual line of work. They had things that we did together with, you know, cleaning, building stuff on the ranch, community dinners, and then the work for the cosmos. You know, those would be the, you know, Biosphere 2 theater performances, things like that, where it's beyond just you. It's not.
Right. Well, to be specific about it, though, to do anything, you first have to have a place somewhere. Mm-hmm. Somewhere over the rainbow. Well, somewhere. If it's over the rainbow, it probably isn't real. So that brings up, you know, the here and now bit. So which here and how long is the now? In the Old West, we used to have a phrase, now then. Now then. That's pretty good. And the Old West was conquered on that. Now then, we've gone to the Eastern Woodlands. So now then, let's go to the Great Plains. We've been to the Great Plains. Now then, let's go to the Rocky Mountain. Well, we've been to the Rocky Mountain. Now then, let's go to the Pacific Ocean. Well, now then, let's go across the Philippines, to the Philippines, across the ocean. Well, it's a Spanish-American War, but well, we got to go beyond planet Earth, the Mars program. Well, that means we're going to be involved in a struggle with the Soviet Union.
They saying we should have humans on Mars by 10 years. 10 years, we could have humans on Mars in 10 years.
Yeah, it's definitely doable. It's doable to have humans on Mars in 10 years. I think we were aiming
Oh, yeah.
for
Well, I was on
2020.
in fact, I was one of the founders of and on the Mars
1995.
committee, which was basically Russian and American and British scientists who were interested in that sort of thing. Now, interest is something that is very powerful. Like interest on your loan, if you don't pay it, after a while you owe more in interest than you do on the loan.
Mm-hmm.
Interest in English. Another thing, people don't realize that every time they say a word, all the meanings that's with that particular sound sequence goes with it to your subconscious, if not to your unconscious, in your subconscious. So actually you have to find a way to get a superconscious, i.e. creativity. Creativity is higher than consciousness. You have to be conscious. You have to be conscious of something. To be something, then something had to create it or start it, whatever word you want to use there. And then once you do that, and say, okay, well, all right, we start the Earth, solar system, galaxy, universe, and where humanity came to a stop there was multiverse was too much for its ruling class to figure out how to make more money out of it. They felt it was rather threatening. However, since I made it my business to study all the different classes, which is pretty good in English. There's the aristocratic, the best, the bourgeois, town people. There's the peasants, farming people, the proletariat, working people. People use different words for it, but those four classes are generally recognized, and you can use, looking for my big dictionary,
It's right over there.
Over there.
right over there. So it has to be that thick. That's called unabridged, which means there's no bridge through it. You gotta walk through the mud and slime. That's when you have an abridged dictionary, because you abridge over all those, what whoever is figuring out that dictionary figures you don't need to have, or maybe even you shouldn't have. It might interfere with flunk and Weigert train.
I want to say something about, to answer your question about some of the techniques that you built, that you developed over the years, developed or used as a way to help people realize their full potentiality. One, you needed people to do these projects. Two, you had to, so somebody needed to rock up and be willing, ready, and able. They may not have had the skills that they needed, but they were willing. And, you know, there was this project. And so then they would often apprentice with somebody that knew, like study somebody that was a ship motor builder. And then that person would then have that training, and they would teach the others and then be able to do that task.
Let me put a small amendment to that. If you waited for people to show up, you'd never get very far, which means you have to travel.
This is the next, then number three I want to say is that exactly, because it was really important for people to break out of their cultural conditioning to realize, or at least my experience for me, to realize my potential, to get outside of my own backyard, you know. And so the fact that we had the capability of we'd do international tours, theater tours, we would travel, we would go by bus, you know, we would drive to all these different cultures, traveled all around the world.
But
and
in my case,
it was really important to become planetary, to understand different cultures.
In my case, being a broke Oklahoman, which is as broke as you can be in the United States, especially back then. John Steinbeck even wrote a book about it, right, called Grapes of Wrath. And so you couldn't get a job. You had to work for whatever the capitalists would give you, or what maybe somebody, Roosevelt or somebody, would pay you off a little bit so you wouldn't become a communist. So so then, of course, I guess you slowly start to learn your place in the culture that you're born into, and then maybe, let's say, you reach the point that you have somewhat mastered that culture. But then what?
Well,
Then you meet an intelligent German or an intelligent Russian or an intelligent Cherokee or an intelligent Chinese, or, what about that? Well, then you sort of have to move up to humanity. And in humanity, you got to sort of move up to the biosphere. And the biosphere is totally ununderstandable unless you add in the technosphere. And the technosphere is totally understandable if you don't bring in the ethnosphere. What are the cultures driving the technosphere? Mm-hmm. So it's an organized, dynamic, evolving complexity.
There you go.
That's a pretty good definition.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. And then, so of course, some people decided to alter their states of consciousness. Maybe there's no way to alter the complexity of the world, but I could organize a better way for me to deal with complexity, dynamic, ever-changing complexity. And so in my case, that involved being a good Oklahoman, which at that time was the bottom of the American culture, the grapes of wrath. Right? The Okies wound up working with greasers and blacks and Okies. And us three lower classes then did what we were told to do by the Californian haute bourgeois. You could read a nice literary thing in that book called Grapes of Wrath. And so that's where I basically started out. Is I left Oklahoma and like a good Okie, really broke, I hitchhiked to Los Angeles, where there was a whole pool of Oklahomans that had lost their land. But Santa Monica was a very interesting place because it was where Bertolt Brecht had taken his German intelligentsia, that is the elite of the Weimar Republic. He took them to a place called Santa Monica. Now, Venice was, of course, for poor Okies, but it was next door to Santa Monica. Mm-hmm. And I realized that I had playing chess, playing checkers and all of that was kind of minute. I had better learn to play chess if I was going to associate with these people. You have to have something to sit in with somebody. So I read Tarrasch, which probably means nothing. But if you're into chess, Tarrasch means like Newton in physics.
Yeah.
And so suddenly, here I am turning 15 in Okie, the bottom of the Californian totem pole. And I go to a little hut, which is devoted to playing chess. And who plays chess? The European refugees from Hitler and Stalin. And me, from the Grapes of Wrath. And it had a beautiful thing in that the chess was right up in the Palisades of Santa Monica, which meant you could play chess all day on a weekend when you were off. I was proletariat. And walk down that Palisades, and suddenly you were in this beach of the most beautiful fucking people trying to get into movies that you could possibly imagine.
Well, you know, Santa Monica is my hometown.
Oh.
Well, I mean, I'm from Arizona, but when I left Arizona, I went to Santa Monica.
Oh, yeah.
So Johnny was 14 at the time that he first went there, and he had read Tarrasch already. And so he told that to the guys, old guys playing, on the beach
Yeah.
And that's the only reason they let him play.
But fortunately, my uncle Bus had been a fairly radical guy.
Yeah.
He was also a great baseball player and all of that. And he was the eldest son of my grandmother. And I visited her in the summers, and he had his library of books, which was fantastic. Among other things, it had a book called Capital
Wow.
by Karl Marx. Another thing was he had a world encyclopedia. And so I spent a lot of time doing that. It was very good because he worked with my, on a ranch in the old days, from the time you were 9 on, you were supposed to pay your way.
Mhm.
You know, but so anyway, that got me into reading. Now, Uncle Bus himself was a very interesting guy. He was really brilliant. So he had in the library all of Karl Marx, especially Das Kapital.
In Oklahoma?
Yeah, well, that's my Uncle Bus.
Wow.
I mean, you wouldn't just ordinarily go to the library in Oklahoma and find that.
No, you
But
would
Uncle
not.
Bus was something. He was a champion baseball player, and so you can get by. You can get by a lot in Oklahoma if you're a good athlete.
Mm.
Yes.
And
Yeah, and you played football too, I do believe.
and basketball.
I want to ask you something, Deborah. What was the draw? Because you were involved in other things. What was the draw for joining this community?
It was the exposure to the ideas that I had never heard anybody talk about, ideas about the planet, the solar system. I was born in Normal, Illinois. I grew up in the Midwest. My family were farmers. And it was, I didn't have that those kinds of intelligent conversations in the areas where I grew up that I felt when people were talking about, things that were important. People were talking about how the world works, how people, how people evolve. I just was intellectually I knew I was connected to something that was alive and that was creating something new. And I was never going to get married or have the kids or anything. I was not. My family were very supportive. They knew I was, off to find something and to experience the world. And I just had the opportunity I was invited to go on a theater tour. But the first year I was there, I did a 9-month workshop after I discovered I couldn't really, carrots was not exactly my forte. I mean, I could grow carrots, but it wasn't like, it was really hard. And so I had gone from France, I moved to London for a while, and I was based at the October Gallery. And then I got invited to go on the theater tour with the Theater of All Possibilities. And we did a big tour in Europe.
Like to Bulgaria, Russia, France, Spain.
Yeah, we went all across Europe. We went to Amsterdam. Then we crossed London, Amsterdam, Paris, Stuttgart. We went to Czechoslovakia. We went to Yugoslavia. It was Yugoslavia at the time. I remember the performance in Klagenfurt.
What kind of performances were you doing?
What was the play that year? Right. These were the contemporary plays that were written by the Theater of All Possibilities. And I don't remember the play that we did that year.
We had a new play every year.
We did 1 or 2 plays a year, and it was like a 3-month tour. And then the rest of the time back to the project. So I spent 9 months in Australia. I had the opportunity.
And our plays were based on Garcia Lorca and Bertolt Brecht, and to a certain extent, Eugene O'Neill.
We did an adaptation. Johnny adapted a play by William Burroughs called Deconstruction of the Countdown. That was, I think that might've been the play that we were doing in Paris. Interzone, Hyperzone, that was the play that we were doing. Actually, it was first 2 acts. The first act was based in Tangier in the beginning of the 60s, and then the end of the 60s. Hyperzone was based in the second act was based in Haight-Ashbury. So they were all historical dramas, original dramas, or some adaptations. We did Goethe's Faust. Ruth the Cobbler.
That she had a good background for understanding this. Her father ran Pergamon Press.
My father was in the, I did come around into the literature, as you know, by 1984.
And her mother
I was already starting.
Was a woman who became a geologist and discovered oil.
Well, let's just say that, yeah. I was lucky to come from a family of liberated parents. My mother was one of the first working women in America in the 50s. She was, you know, not too many mothers worked in those days. But she had the benefit of the Cultural Revolution that happened in the 60s. You know, I mean, it was a lot. I mean, that as all women did, but she was out there, you know, she was, she was always a go-getter. So I probably got a lot of her inspiration in my life, I'm sure. And I probably, you know, I didn't know that publishing was something that was in your genes, but I had a publishing company before my dad. He was just the marketing director.
Okay, so let's, you know, and this is pretty interesting. So I can see the initial draw, and then the Biosphere was such a huge project. So that was probably a bit of glue for the community. Yeah. Then you had the Biosphere kind of disintegrating, or at least your involvement in that project. What happens then, and how do you keep the community together at that moment where it's actually a bit more difficult, right?
It split. There was a huge rupture, and the school was split into different parts. It shook the foundation. A number of people that really, you know, felt, you know, that this was a good. The ecotechnic discipline was a, you know, good foundation to continue to develop and to further the you know, but it's like with any kind of project, I think, you know, it reached a point where there were fractures. There were challenges and forces that, you know, caused there to be a shift amongst the members that had worked together for 20 years in terms of what the goals might be. So it was a mutually satisfactory dissolution of the joint venture. We did split up the projects that we had built together. And then some people stayed with the project, some people went on to do different things. So there people that, you know, really are building lives for themselves, you know, have really strong individual lines, continue to work with the projects and keep them going. And so we do still have a biomic network of projects, and but some of those are graduating on, moving on to find, you know, new owners that are going to carry on. Some people want to actually carry on the work that we had done there, you know, in the case of Australia, so which would be wonderful not to see it get turned into, you know, a suburb, but which is the other possibility. So then we just keep on, you know, sticking. The idea now is to figure out how to different ways to transmit these ideas to people that want to learn how to build community today, and they want that, you know, they want to know what's the glue that holds it together. There are the 3 lines of work is really helpful. It's really hard to keep something going a long time with a lot of different individuals when you don't have enough variety for people to. Some people are artists, some people are business types, some people are, and so you know, it really and the task needs to be, the most important thing is that the task of that project does need to be very big. It needs to be big enough to have everybody's, you know, attention to really, and there's that commitment. You have decisions and you have commitments, and nothing will happen if you don't have a group of individuals that have made a decision and a commitment to make it happen. And so that's really what it's about. That's the glue.
Well, the main thing is what to do after Synergia Ranch. So the idea was to go planetary.
Yes.
We built a ship and we registered it in the British Empire, in Belize. Mm-hmm. And we got in Belize because we first went into Panama, and then you're under the Amerikanskis, just not just good.
Mhm.
So I talked to the guy who ran the Belize Revolution. He said, why don't we ever get anything? I said, it's simple, you can get something. Just copy the Panama law word for word. And we will move our ship to Belize. I'd much rather be under the British Empire than the American Empire. That's triple underlined today. What was Trumpy want me?
Well, I do want to say that a lot of things that were done back in the 60s and 70s with it would be impossible practically to do them today.
Yeah. Oh, and
Land is very difficult to get at an affordable price. You have to own the property. So our big advice to young people is whatever you do, find something that you can buy and own, because you don't want to put the capital in and then find out, and just be leasing.
Yeah.
So it's so key. We think, and this goes back to the, economic training, that is just, you really want to own the means of production. And
yeah, but now I want to see, most people in the establishment, they would first say that you must be a Marxist outfit, subversive. I think Marx was a great thinker, but I also think Adam Smith was a great thinker. And I think the greatest thinker was Henry George. See, Marx had labor,
Mm-hmm.
and you have capital, and then you have land. So this is a Henry George, Karl Marx, Adam Smith enterprise.
Okay, so it's more egalitarian, where you actually own the land, and you are wanting it to have some sort of sustainability economically.
Yeah,
right.
enterprise,
Which is what enterprise is all
then you
about.
look at land, and the freest place on land is either a Australian station, an American ranch, or a London art gallery, or a French farm.
Mm. These days, it might be a commercial office building in New York.
yeah, I know, and they're converting old warehouses into, it's, but it's one of the biggest keys to all these enterprises and these is the 3 lines of work. So because you have some kind of a spiritual, or some kind of something that is an individual, at least an individual evolutionary kind of attraction to a project. Then you have a practical enterprise level of it, and then it really needs to be doing something for the greater good, or why do it? So it's the synergy of these lines of work, and it's the synergy really of how these projects actually work together planetarily, because our ability to now have to travel and have a base like you do in different communities. I don't go to hotels, I just go and I live at these different projects, and then to have the access to those totally different cultures, to be able to be submerged in other cultures other than the one that you grew up in, it makes that blasts a person's capabilities and potentiality wide open, because they're able to see. And then it's just it's a way to break out of our cultural conditioning and to be able to act in other ways. And in that way, that's why I think it makes a person more they are expanding their potential as a human, because they can relate to somebody from a very different culture, because they've experienced any other culture outside of their own enough to know that, hey, there are totally different ways to look at something. And the problem that we have in politics is because I think people are just never gotten out of their own backyard. They only know how to talk about one thing, and it can we need to get out of our own political backyards. There is a community of common understanding and experience that can be shared, and it's much easier for people if they've had some ability to travel. The ancient proverb we often have a toast to on Sunday nights is that it isn't necessary to live, but it is necessary to travel.
Okay.
Hey Cameron,
Okay.
I think we're good.
Okay, so the question is this: you may have decades longer, but how can others support the vision and Synergia, and even maybe projects that you already have existing. What can people do to support community sustainability?
Well, we don't look for support. Number one. And as a matter of fact, we support people. If they're promising enough.
I'm very glad to hear that. That explains a lot. In effect, I think we do support people, but we try to, the projects have, we do have, in times when, people can travel again and come in, and even now in special cases, we have training programs, we have apprentice programs at the different projects for people that have got a very strong interest. We have, or volunteer programs. The Heraclitus itself is being rebuilt. That's a whole, how anybody that wants to learn how to build a ship should contact the Heraclitus. We have a web page.
But the biggest thing is, we went outside the capitalist system.
Do tell.
And we didn't even get involved in the socialist or the fascist system.
What was the monetary system that you guys were creating? Because you had a lot of people in there, and I was going to ask that. But,
it goes back to fundamentals.
Okay.
So the fundamental, Henry George says, is land.
Right.
The fundamental, Marx said, is labor.
Yes.
The fundamental things for Adam Smith is capital.
Right.
So we work with all three.
Mm-hmm. So you've got to attract the venture capital to get the land. You have to attract
land,
the people
labor, and capital
to get the labor. And then, then usually if you've attract the capital, get the land, then there's a business proposal, this much, this is the enterprise. You have to have a good enterprise idea. That business needs to support itself after the initial capital investment has been made. The deals were all structured where there was a return on the capital investment. The property was the guarantee, because the property values were all going to go up.
Let me go a little bit into that. So let's start land, labor, and capital.
Yeah.
Now, the main problem with labor is it needs to be highly skilled.
Okay.
So we set up a special training program to give people skills in enterprise. And if you stay around the Synergia, you have to have an enterprise. We don't support you. And if your parents support you, you're probably too spoiled to work for a living. Now, and if you get the right kind of land, you can always make a living off of it from the garden. And you can save yourself, and because you have land, you can make, see, adobe. This is all from the land here. Mm-hmm. And if you have old structures around, you can tear them down, see, and there's free wood for you.
And that's also very sustainable.
Yeah.
As someone who cares about cradle to grave,
economically, they built everything themselves. They started a construction company and to build buildings, and then they would go and tear down buildings to use the materials to build here. So they did a lot of things themselves, a lot of hard work, just like to do stuff all the time. And that's how the economics work, because it was low cost. People were not paid people earned money working to build houses. The construction company gave enough income to people that they could afford to pay for their operating. We call it operating. That's the room and board, something for utilities, something for your food. Had a community kitchen, so that bulk buying, your costs were low. All of those things were really important. No commuting, so you reduce your cost of living expenses by setting up your base of operations, means of production, all those things. Then your economics change when you do that. You can't talk about building a Synergia with the same economic system as applied to out there.
But let's get down to practicality.
Yes.
Land is fundamental.
Yes. Labor
and capital. So there's Marxism, Adam Smithianism, and Henry Georgeism.
Frontierism.
Each one of them has that. So the deal is that if somebody can, everybody learns that basics. So a person that wants to make money by creating a product, they go to the entrepreneurial, so to speak. Well, what do you want to do? You want to make wood stuff, right? Like here. We make a wood shop. And you get what you make off of the wood minus a percentage for the people providing the wood shop.
Yeah, a small percentage of the gross would go to pay for the rent back into the ranch.
So mostly it was based on an entrepreneurial sort of exchange rather than hiring salaried or hire hourly.
That's impossible.
I
All you do
I
is get
haven't.
into class war.
Yeah.
Hi, Lena.
I'm
Okay.
just looking for a mantra.
Okay, we're just about finished here.
Oh, it's no problem.
No.
Hi.
I was the union organizer for CIO in Chicago,
Yes.
so I know how deadly class struggle can get.
So by having it more community-based and
No,
entrepreneurial,
not community-based.
what is it?
Well, that's a big abstract noun.
Yes,
It's people-based.
that's
There
another
you
big
go.
abstract now.
Now, he liked to call it a work
Well,
democracy.
I think in the 60s,
Work democracy.
Yeah.
thousands of people went down the drain talking about community. What community? Well, they became part of the community of acid-head intellectuals.
So you were more
In
creating.
other words, upper middle class dropouts.
You were creating a place for people to hopefully synergize together, also expand their own, maybe you referred to it, which I love the idea of laundering your brain, actually getting rid of some of the old conditioning and inviting in a higher wisdom somehow. What kind of methods are you using for the higher wisdom? Travel, art,
Meditation.
Yeah.
meditation?
Well, actually, now economically,
Yes.
it's based on land,
Mhm.
Henry George,
Mhm.
labor, Karl Marx,
Mhm.
and industry, Adam Smith.
Okay.
And so, what is this? Ex-union organizer, Colorado Mines engineer, Harvard Business School finance.
But
So I
that's-
first applied it to myself. What could you do if you put all this together
Right.
there
as an
were-
active vector,
Right.
not intellectually?
And the first one was Synergia Ranch.
The
That was
first
the
point,
first-
when you study it, the first
the
point
first project,
is
yes.
land.
Though they had a place in Cerritos, but this was the first big one.
The second point is enterprise.
Mhm.
And the third point is theater.
So the theater
There's
work,
always a drama involved in it.
the theater line was the part that really plumbed into people's real, what they could do, the real stuff, because you had to learn parts, you had to learn how to, communicate, you had to learn how to speak, you had to get past whatever obstacle you had, go on stage, get over stage fright. I mean, the
You had
amount
to
of
even
work,
become another
the
person.
amount
right?
of work that
Well-
one had to do on oneself to do the theater work, the theater line. And it was great theater, it was great work and everything like that, dance, all it was very liberating. The workout, the workouts were very physical. You had to do warm-ups, very physical, breaking down, armoring, getting
Theater was based on Artaud and Brecht.
very high, I mean, this is Kathleen Gray, who Johnny and all the people that this line of work in theater was very strong the first decade. And people, and it did push people out of their cultural behavior pattern. They learned how to act, to learn how to be able to be. Being, the school in the beginning and still today, I would say, is referred to as a school of sink or swim. It's, you just learn by doing. It was all about learn by doing. And it was so many different things that you could learn to do because it was really a question of what you were interested in. Interest is a function of value. And if you have a value for doing something, then you are going to learn how to do it and to learn how to do it well. The fact that he had space to be able to do it and the freedom to be able to do it and the economic freedom to be able to do it because it was a low cost of living. You didn't have to make, it's not about profit maximization. It's about making a profit, but it's about making the profit that you need to keep it going. You don't need to maximize. The biggest problem that we face with our economic system, and I studied economics at UMass myself, what is that it's all based on profit maximization. If they could just change that demand and stop that, the need for greed, it's, you know, and then it could be sustainable. There's nothing wrong. I am not anti, you know, I'm not anti-business. I'm not anti-capitalism or anything like that. I'm just anti-profit maximization.
You're anti-greed.
Yeah, I'm anti-greed. And I don't say the word anti very often, if rare, but if I had to put myself in a position, that's what it is. I'm really, you know, I'm into business. I'm into, you know, commerce, and I think it's important. I don't want to go off grid. I don't want to go to Bitcoin and all that stuff, but I can see that the banking system and everything, what it has done, anything that can break that iron grip on the planet would be beneficial. So
but to keep all this specific, like in theater, our theater was based on O'Neill, Brecht, and Artaud. So we set up an operation in Paris, and we worked with the Artaud people. We played East Berlin and West Berlin. We played with the Brecht people. And we played in the United States and
living theater, with the living theater people.
Living theater and that.
You played in East Berlin before the wall came down?
Right.
You went to East Berlin before the wall came down?
Yeah.
Yeah, they had a theater performance. They had a theater set up.
Right
at Project Charlie.
We were le théâtre de toutes les possibilités, the theater of all possibilities.
See?
As a matter of fact, we did extremely well in Berlin because I was there with, and here we were doing Bertolt Brecht. And Bertolt Brecht was very big on the other side of the Iron Curtain.
Oh, yeah.
And then on in Western Europe, we played Artaud. And in the United States, we generally played either me or O'Neill.
It was there was a theater group that was working with heroin addicts rehab, and they were invited, called Project Release, and they invited the theater to come and do some workshops for a couple of weeks in Berlin. And it was their theater space, and they had a hamburger restaurant they opened up right in the wall, right at Project Charlie. It was like on the second floor. I think there was a brothel somewhere else nearby. I'm not sure, but anyway, the stories are great. And we made strong alliances with several Germans joined the group, and one of them runs Kathmandu Project today.
So we played Brecht on one side of the wall. We played Artaud on the other side.
And she continues to do theater. She has a studio there in Kathmandu, and it's a fantastic theater company.
And we played in Prague, and we played Kafka.
She's done Milarepa. She's done incredible theater performances in at the Biosphere.
And we had a big audiences in Yugoslavia.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, to go into these remote areas and everything, and then you're putting on these theater performances, it was the way to connect. The ship uses theater when it was going out in the Amazon, and all the islands would always do theaters performances. That was their gift to the people where they were visiting, and then they were always got big festivals and dances performed for them afterwards and everything. And the ship, the black ship, you know, people would see it. They said the black ship is coming, but you know, it's a black ship with red eyes. That's the eyes of the Heraclitus over there above the door. So you know,
we'll drop in a JPEG of it.
Yeah, the Heraclitus. So the Heraclitus became the way to travel the world and to visit all these different cultures. And today it's
the cheap way to travel with the theater.
It's current. So to answer your question about how people can be involved, the Institute of Ecotechnics has a website, the ecotechnics.edu website. It is a nonprofit. We have relied upon the support of generous individuals over the years, volunteers, and of companies that donate goods to help rebuild the ship. Or in Puerto Rico, we've had wonderful people helping us to rebuild there and to rebuild the roads.
Now, wait, there's another point. What kind of investment for all of this? I'm a Henry Georgist. I'm not a Marxist or Adam Smithian. That's land, labor, and capital. I go down for Henry George. Land is the most basic thing.
Yeah, and it was the big lesson.
So we always acquired property.
Mhm.
And then the property might be an old abandoned building. So when we were there, we would repair the building and make it into a better theater. Or it might be like here, it might be an old abandoned ranch. And so forth, you get the idea. And
Oh,
so the biggest thing was that I think, well, there were several things that really differentiated us from all the other theaters. But one of it was that we owned the land, which could also include a building like in Londonia House, where we got a,
yeah.
we got that one. How did we get that one? This big, wonderful house in London, because that was the days of Little England. And so they had this lumpen proletariat raging through London, tearing everything down that they could get their hands on. So we got that house for practically nothing because people were terrified to go there. We had to escort the women from the subway to the house.
Oh, there was some kind of union thing going on. At the
I
time,
mean,
but-
it was one of the roughest districts in London. The lumpen proletariat was in power. But what we wound up with that was that how else are you going to get a two-story house with a fantastic, huge basement in the center of London? The 3-minute walk to the British Museum.
I would like to say that you're probably the best property speculator that I've ever met.
Well, now this one hasn't done too bad.
And this one hasn't done too bad. The last thing I want to say about how it's, and the Heraclitus is being rebuilt, as you know. So the projects go on, and we're in a period of really transitioning to a younger generation. So here at the ranch, we're really working with the regenerative agricultural techniques, studying and application of what we can to improve the soils right around
But-
here. And then
I don't think they just go on, they evolve.
exactly, that's what I mean. The spiritual line of work that has been amongst this community members it is so individual, yet at the same time it's because this person here who keeps disappearing on the screen, it's quite extraordinary, he's not only is he polymath of ideas and things like that, but it's the synergy of all of these different philosophical schools that he has taught to us through talks and lectures over the years, and through guided meditations, everything from the Sufi to Gurdjieff to Hindu to all of the different spiritual traditions, a
forget Kyoto.
taste of them. And then it's the idea of it's the idea of what's in it. There's the way is neither this nor that. It's like there are so many different ways to explore and to discover oneself. There is no one way. And what he's just been able to get people to even realize that they can discover themselves. And the whole idea, minimally, that people can wake up from being asleep. That is so important for where we're at right now, because, most of humanity is just sleepwalking. They're conditioned. They don't realize that they have other options in their life.
So the project here could regenerative soil, like what are the main themes that you're working on here at Synergia?
Well, we're working on getting a really good composting system and a soil regeneration program going in, and just applying it every year to the garden grow areas, and then to see how we can expand that out to some of the other degraded areas. We have an erosion control program that John's been doing out in the arroyos for 50 years. You can see there's check dams anywhere. So, it's just really caring for the land and just studying and then, of course, to producing the beautiful, with the goal of producing beautiful vegetables, so that we can then sell them to people to have a healthy diet.
Organic diet.
So
And your trees as well, fruit trees, hopefully.
Fruit trees, we're looking at where to go, because the orchard is old and there's a bit of disease and dieback, and we've got this incredibly unpredictable weather in New Mexico. But We may go into greenhouses eventually and getting some greenhouses here, but and looking at water usage, because this is a desertified grassland and we're approaching another drought.
Now, there's a science to all this. There is science to it. For example, why do we get the ranch so economically? Because it was being eroded away.
Oh, wow.
Oh, he was.
So there were gullies everywhere. Now, when you study gullies, what makes a gully? When the water is running more than 4 miles per hour. So it doesn't mean you have to dam everything up. It means you have to slow it down to 4 miles an hour or less. I call them check dams. They check the flow. They don't stop the flow like a regular dam.
Oh, interesting.
And then what happens then, it gradually builds up behind each dam. It's rather very deep gullies gradually build up and do that. So then the local soil conservation people really like seeing this. So it becomes a showcase to other people having highly eroded property. And so that kind of thing is what we do. And like in Puerto Rico, it was a question of wood. They were just deforesting everything. So when I went over to talk to the national park people, and I said, why don't you give us 160? Maybe it was more, 640 acres.
No, it was 1,000. It was like 940 acres.
All right, 948 acres. But it was hilly land and it was under fantastic erosion.
It was cut over from cash cropping.
So I worked out a deal, what you call check dams. As long as you can slow it to 4 miles an hour, it will deposit. Above that, it cuts.
Interesting.
Now, it's much easier to build a dam that could take 4 miles an hour than it is to take like 0.
Yeah.
And, so that got us a big authentication from the people that run the American land business, the capitalists that run it.
Yeah.
Because they're looking for something like that. And even the conservative people realize that in a hill country like Puerto Rico, if your land is being washed away, you could be as rich, but it's all going to go down to the sea.
Right.
So I made a deal that we would put in 40,000.
We planted 40,000. We planted 40,000 trees.
We planted 40.
Yeah.
40,000 trees. Now, the government doesn't think that big. You got to think bigger than the government at its best. Even they didn't think 40,000. But it turned out that there was another guy there that had seen all this years ago, and he had begun planting a certain kind of tree that he thought would survive there. That was a hardwood tree.
Yeah.
It's the Plumajo.
So we made a deal with him and got 40,000 of his trees. And then we got all this eroded land from the government. And then we put those eroded trees there in the canyons in Puerto Rico.
And so this is called Harvard Business School 20-year business plan. You're not going to start harvesting those trees for 15 years to start thinning. So this is in addition to the smaller profit margins that we're looking for,
Right.
also we have a long-term business plan model. We don't need to get a return on our investment in 5 years.
Right.
So those things were the basically thing.
Yeah.
The projects were meant to be demonstration projects. So that means that we wanted their model, they're small scale. We're not trying to but they could be scaled up. So
Right.
that's the idea of these projects, why they're done at the scale that they're done. We're not trying to attract 1,000 members, although, if I could develop the educational programs, the online talks, the conferences, that side of things that we're doing now, then, I'm trying to build our mailing list out for the Ecotechnics. So we are building a mailing list and a newsletter for the Institute's programs and projects that are ongoing, and we'll get as we can start to take people back into, we do have a training program at the October Gallery in London in gallery management. And Puerto Rico has a really wonderful program. So that's how people can be involved. And, it really is for somebody that's looking for adventure. You learn by doing. That's
Let's
it's
go
the only
through some of
way.
the mechanics of it, because it's really interesting. How do we wind up with this project being given to us? Because there were some people that really loved the forest land back there. And they had developed a special tree, blue mahogany. And they had 40,000 of them. And the mahogany interests, the capitalist monopoly Weyerhaeuser wanted to destroy them all because of the future competition. So this swung the thinking people in the Puerto Rican intelligentsia and government. I said, what you got there, 40,000 trees, each one of those is going to be worth $1,000. You got $40 million a tree coming in there. They said, well, who's going to run it for 40 years for nothing? I said, we will run it for nothing. At no charge.
Oh, they paid.
The only thing is,
a tree to plant them too.
we may have make it a rest escape for a few people every year, charge them to live up in the woods. Okay. So suddenly, we have 40,000 trees. And they've just gone into production.
Well, we've been harvesting them now for about 5 years, and then we had the hurricane, and we've had to, deal with that. But the projects, once you have the dirt, once you have the ground, and you have the capital, the other thing that these guys did is they just loved to work all the time. None of this would have happened if these guys had all not just been really, really interested in working all the time. It was a lot of hard work, and these were not lightweights. They were not sitting around there were no substances were not allowed in the first 15 years. There was, and no music, no TV. So to get the unconditioning out of people for like the first 10 years.
No music either.
Yeah,
huh?
no, they didn't have music. Singing in song.
You could make your own.
Make your own music, but there wasn't radios and things like that. So it was just really for a deliberate period of time to kind of like break that, because that it wasn't automatic. But it was, it's not like when I say the School of Sink or Swim, it was a very rigorous program. They were learning lines while they were planting seeds in the garden. They were building. They had a 4 hour a day construction crew project. They'd go down, build Project Llano in Santa Fe, which you should go and visit. It's on East Palace. I'll show you where it is.
Okay.
First 2-story condominium complex in town. And so they did that all in a 4-hour workday, 4 days a week. And so they broke the workday down, and they had about 200 people that were on the construction crew. And they also hired women. They hired a lot of women in Santa Fe. So that was the first early, and so then the other 4 hours they would work on theater, and then the other 4 hours they would either make dinner or have personal time. So it was a really intense schedule.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the theater was very good. You can't lose, because no matter what happens, you're going to learn about theater.
We haven't had the capacity to do much in that world in the last 5-6 years. It's been missing. We've been trying to do some things here with the kids and try to maintain we did a cabaret performance for our 45th anniversary, which was quite funny. Oh
yeah, now the theater they're going really great.
It's not as much of a daily thing as it was, but I'd sure love to be able to get a production together again sometime. It really does lighten up life. It also helps with the group dynamics a tremendous amount when you're living in community. And I just want to end with this one quote that we really love. I think it was Margaret Mead who said it. That community is a group of irrationals united in the hope of the impossible.
Right.
That's good. Do you have any last word, John?
Anyway.
What's your last word you want to say?
Well, the last words, I hope that there'll be a number of years before I get to my real last words.
Yes, we hope so.
Do you have any last words for this particular moment?
A clever interviewer. Nobody's ever thought of that one before. You never know when you're going to find a reincarnation disguised as an American.
Well, this has been a really, really inspiring conversation for me to have with you. Thank you
Oh,
very much for having
I
us.
want to illustrate, give me one of those big books.
Okay.
All right.
I just show you something people overlook a lot, that there's a lot of knowledge.
I'm going to.
Now, this is when,
Paul here?
Yeah, Paul's
Okay,
here.
I'll be right back.
Cool, sounds good.
this is when people still publish books. Feel it. Heavy, man, heavy.
Heavy,
Look at that.
heavy in thought and in,
So one thing is we look up really great books. Now, the modern people running publishing, they don't think they can make any money out of something like this. Look at it. Detailed work. That's in the United States, Casa Grande. That's
Casa
how big
Grande.
the Indians built.
wow.
The whiteys really don't want to publicize that.
All right, John, I'm going to stop
Yeah,
this
yeah,
now.
yeah.
Hang on.